This is a big update. Got 2 of the doors wrapped. Boom, dude! Boom, dude! Back. Okay, well, I think it's time for an update on this thing, the Exotic, because a lot of this big hyperstructure, if you will, is done in the rear. Joey, watch your step. There's an Evolution cutting saw down there. Yeah, it's kind of a good milestone here. This back half endeavor, we bit off a lot. Thomas and I kind of agreed on a design. I guess it's not biting off a lot, but it's just a very intricate, complex process to get these streamlined shapes like this. But it is done. I just have tires mocked on there as kind of a reference for proportions and size. And then we did talk about, you know, our fuel cells, individual fuel cells, so passenger and driver both get their own, wrapping around here, kind of filling in the void on each side of the spares. I'm gonna take the spares off in a second here. I just kind of wanted to get a glimpse on what we have going on right now. All the plate work stuff. Let me go grab the reference drawings. You can see these are rough concept sketches of what we were going for here. Can you get down here or no? Obviously we already have these down tubes, you know, the belt line down tube that's coming from here, and then your cab is here for this drawing. And your down tubes here, and they're tapering together. And then we wanted to create another big structure, a sculpted structural portion coming off the chassis and kind of rounding back behind the back tire where the resting area for the fuel cell is going to be per side. Below that is a plate structure, which is this. And this is the rough shape initially. And this has been tailored to what we need to get for packaging in the truck. But, you know, all plate tie-in that's doubling as a support. We trimmed inches off this thing, so this whole thing is kind of tailored back more to get more capacity for the fuel cell and to not have to draw a shape back in here for no reason. With that, there's a sway bar hiding in here. You can kind of see the arm itself and the actual bar going through. So I think that's enough information where I can kind of show you guys what's going on. The other one thing we want to touch into is this upper bolt register area that's all plated. And that's going to house that big billet cross member with you know, provisions for the heim, or the, you know, the rod end for the spare tire lockdown and act as a saddle for the spares, as well as a hold down for the rear mount radiator. Okay, so for you guys, I wanted to kind of catch myself up on where we last left off with this thing. We had the passenger side roughed in. We did not have the interior portions of the plate work done. We had the outside tacked in. We had the tax runway light area recessed and kind of fixed into there. And then we had like a proof of concept here of just where it was blended to show what it was really going to look like, all finalized out. So a lot of like intricate shapes like this, for myself, it's always a matter. Ooh. Okay. It's always a matter of doing the same thing over again. Like, you know, if I'm gonna build this whole thing out on one side, then boom, I have to build that on this side too and replicate it the same exact way, on top of making sure it's all square and true because it's part of the chassis. So we took some steps along the way to make that easier. That being like got the main 2-inch 120 wall structure down and tied in, welded. The 3/4 wall tube that's on the narrower, the minor axis of this shape is tied into there with the little appropriate standoffs in there. We got that stuff done. And then I think we plated both. And I finished one side out all the way as far as like this hyperstructure here. And in doing so, that always, my poor brain drags into having to do the other side. Oh my gosh, now I gotta do the other side. And it's a mission, but you know, along the way I took a lot of templates. This stuff is completely exact per side, so I can replicate all the templates as long as I flip them or do whatever I need to indicate, you know, left or right. Last time we talked about the uncomfortable feelings of building very intricate structures that might look simple and streamlined when their final construction is done, but the process of getting to that point can lend to making yourself feel uncomfortable or something looking awkward, you know, and that's what I kind of stressed on this stuff, is like, oh my gosh, like it's so weird right now, oh my gosh, and trusting the process. It just, I have to tell myself that, because it's the same with like building a dash or doing something wild, and same with like Thomas, you know, he's been very patient and good about like kind of trusting that process too, and knowing that we're always going to come out with a better end result than we even sketched out. And this same stuff, like, man, it's really taking a risk for reward and a huge amount of trusting, to where I just put my head down and finish the shape, so we know what the shape's going to be in the long run, and we know where we're going with this thing, and just putting my head down and doing it, and not just doing one side but doing both. So that's what we have here now. This is completely sealed, completely welded, finalized. This whole big blade, if you will, it's manipulated in here to look like it's intersected by this plate structure. So, you know, there's a lot of pieces in here. It's funny to touch all this stuff because I know I'm gonna have to wipe it, but it's so smooth. It's every step we've done, like from B pillar to down tubes to now like this outside hyperstructure, has gotten like smoother and smoother as far as the craftsmanship on here. So this whole piece is like one big structural shape. So it's almost like these are dragging into here, and then this thing intersects, ping, and is like notched into here as like a big piece, like a blade. And you can really kind of see that, how it notches through. There's that big material breakup in here where the fuel cell hardlines will come through and manifest themselves into the fuel cells. And part of this still feeling kind of uncomfortable, still feeling unfinished, where it needs all its other pieces to really represent the shape and the package and the proportions that it's going to own in the end. And that being said, you know, we've kind of gone over it before, but the fuel cell is going to register into this area, and it'll obviously have its own custom shape here. We'll have the exhaust wrap through this void, which that's why this void is here and it's this shape, as it's based on this exhaust. The exhaust will go up, just like we showed in the last episode. If you need to catch up and watch the last one to kind of get in tune with this, I would. And we had a mock-up fuel cell kind of surfacing, at least just for the horizontal portions and the back wall or the rear wall here. The exhaust will come through, and then this fuel cell is going to start at this point. It's going to kind of taper down, and then it'll come to a point out here where it'll have enough of a taper too. We're not going to go 90 out here. We're not going to run this thing level. It's got to have a little bit of tension dragging towards the back, so that taper will go in here, and then it'll come and it'll do a surface change, boom, down onto the edge of this thing. Now, what stuff needs to be considered with that is, how are we going to hold that down? It's got a lot of structure here. So having a big, like, gnarly chassis area out here, it doesn't need that. It really just needs some very key, strong points, maybe 1, 2, and they twist and intersect and come down. That's like a holster for these fuel cells. What kind of construction that looks like, I don't know just yet. Maybe like a carbon monocoque or something where it has almost like a machined holstered area, and then like carbon monocoque comes, intersects, and then splits back down, and just a little bit of a register in key areas to hold the cell where it needs to go. This structural portion itself already holds the cell in the front. So once that thing registers 2 or 2.5 inches into here, it can't move out of here. And the good part is it kind of just slides in like a holster, and then it drops, and then you just secure it, and it's done. You're not doing like, oh, I gotta get out of there. None of that. It's all good. It just kind of goes in and seats itself. These are things to think about. We'll touch on that in a second. There's an order of operations here that we need to start implementing to get this thing done with consistent efficiency, I guess. Not just things that are like in my power as far as what I can build next or what I can do, but we need to have the wheels turning on different avenues as well. So talking about like the upper cross member, the billet cross member that needs to go up here, that's something that needs to happen. The fuel cells are something that's not done under our roof, where we have to get everything, every bit of information processed here in order for this area to be scanned and then the cells to be manufactured. In order for the fuel cell right now to be processed, or at least this area be scanned and ready to have a fuel cell manufactured, we want to just finalize the interior structure here that's almost like just a secondary cradle for the tires, and something that kind of keeps these things centered and not just depending on the actual cell to do it. So that being said, like structure from here, and this is just a rough concept to show you guys, but you know, this tie-in point is built for structure to come, and this structure will represent the angle of what this does back here. So when the cell starts to lead off, this will be the highest point of the cell, and when this starts to lead off, this structure is going to follow suit with the cell. Once this comes to a certain point back here, we're going to miter down, boom, into the chassis. So there'll be this, and then there'll be one more tie-in tube to go to that angle, and that'll all be kind of an extensive roll. I'm going to try to do it out of aero tube. I'm going to try to roll the aero tube. So we'll do a test hit on that and see if it's worth it. The way this might work is to machine roller dies out of Delrin to do it and kind of hold the aero tube true. But I'd like to get this all done out of aero. Structure-wise, having this portion done and doing this next is going to be the ticket as far as getting us closer to scanning for the fuel cells. Internal structure here for the tires, we'll call that the holster for the tires. That complete. The finish of the exhaust. Now, finish meaning routing this thing out the back. I don't know what the tips or the exits are going to look like, but at least just getting the package through the constraints of where the cell is going to be is important. That's what we kind of did with this hole here. So finishing the routing of this thing, kind of having it kick, go up, and then start its exit path. Right through this top corner is going to be where we want this thing to run. Now this doesn't have to be at an angle. This can almost either go up, but I'm thinking probably level, and then you'll have the plane of the fuel cell kind of dive in. So I bet that this point here where this ends is probably where this would want to exit. And Thomas and I have talked about this kind of running out through the bodywork in the back and having a really unique exit. But you know, again, packaging for the fuel cell. That's the hot topic here, is getting everything in place that needs to be in place so then we can scan it and we can have this whole thing molded. It's going to be a carbon cell, so it's going to go in there, and this will also give us some ideas of what we can do. We can get all this thing in the computer and get some ideas on how we want to strap this thing properly, and definitely do something maybe where we also incorporate another hanger for the exhaust or pickup for the exhaust in the strap mechanism. But there will be a shelf here in the cell, in the shape of the cell, where it'll have a shelf for the exhaust to kind of run through. It's not going to go around it or anything. It'll just have a cut, which will be a definite, like a shape change that you'll notice. So that's an important part as well. Part of this key thing, like another thing we talk about of uncomfortable and just trusting your process here with like the shapes and the structure, is this missing cross member, and having like these big plated structures just floating here with huge bolt registers. And it's like, why? What's going on here? And that incomplete thing is only showing you that it makes sense because all your parts are going to fit in here properly. The upper arms on the front have very unique MCD1 style machine work and design into them. This rear cross member, as well as the front cross member, is going to have that same thing, except it's completely functional. So not only is it tying the whole chassis together in a rigid way, but it's saddling the tires here. It's holding down the radiator like we talked about in the drawing. And then it's also running one of these as a pocket for the rod end to tie in to hold the tires down. And we'll have a nice mechanism here that's not a strap. Cameron's Ranger tires on here. Thanks for the Barra. All right, this gives you a little more perspective here on the packaging. So you can definitely see here, talking about like that cross member, there's a lot of voids now. The last video, I think we were set up with the winch on here, set up with the radiator just kind of landing down in the angle it needed to be, but not with the actual finalized lower mount or tray. But you know, the awkward guys here for me are these tubes. And just that really shows you like these are also stoppers for the tires too, but they're structural. So once we have this portion tied in, everything has a home. It's like insane how much it fills out. And it fills out in a way where it definitely looks like a tailored suit to this thing. And it's not just a chassis with components in it. It is a chassis completely built, intertwined with the components. And anytime I've looked at like a hyper-engineered car, it's the same thing. You look in there and it's incredible how much design and detail and integration is built into these things. Not like a race car. And again, I have space for race cars, but when you're talking about something exotic that's a purpose-built vehicle like this, everything has a sense of home and design into it, where it's not just chassis parts. There's a lot more to it, and with reason. And just same with a race vehicle, you know. They both have their home and their functionality. Last time you saw this, we had a lot of kind of roughed in, tacked stuff going on. And you can see now both sides are symmetrical. Both sides are completely welded out. All the parts are in place. The sway bar is not mocked up with a tube in there anymore with hose clamps. It's an actual bar that's chilling. It's ready to go. There's a lot more gusseting and structure that's tied in. So you can see how if you just follow the structure, this kind of tightens this tube, and the beltline tube kind of tighten into the back of this structure, and then they go and they flow, tighten down here, and then they spread out to grab structure for the sway bar, and then they pull back, and this whole portion kind of pulls back into the structure for this. Everything is completely boxed. There's no like open ends or open tabs, and everything's 360 welded everywhere. This portion, these kind of sculpted structural areas on the car have been really big milestones as far as pushing myself to finish them, just because they're labor intensive and just, you know, they require an extreme amount of attention to get right and to come out in final form like this. I don't think we have many more of these to go on the car. I think there might be something up front, some kind of treatment, and then that's it. So really finalizing this thing as a complete chassis is what we've been like chasing after for a while now. Taking it from what it was when we first took delivery of it, taking the steps backwards to do all the right steps forwards to have this perfect foundation. It's really been our goal. And once we can get past that portion where we're like accessorizing this and doing all the sheet metal work and the dash and the upper console, that's really going to be like the awesome shit. And I know there's been a lot of excitement with this stuff, but really that's going to be where this thing excels even more. So it's awesome to see the like the layers and the bones and the foundation build at this level, and then to start dressing it and finalizing it with all the components, all the electronics, all the interior appointments, all the exterior treatments. I'm really looking forward to it. The next portion for myself is getting this structure done in here, running the exhaust where we need to run it, and then getting this scanned. As well as getting this scanned, what I can do with this top portion, I'll definitely do some digital sketching where I'll just draw over my pictures and do that like we've been doing everything else, and that'll give me a really good idea of what we want for machine work in here. Get that drawn up in SolidWorks. That can start going right off to machine work. This stuff can get scanned. This can start being drawn in SolidWorks. We can figure out our mounting tie down systems. Now, as soon as I get my portion done, so 1, 2, and maybe 3 on the drawing, I can start dressing the rest of this. Our sway bar is ready. We have our bump stops. Let me grab those. I think we talked about them last time. We'll have a pretty good spot for these guys in here at the appropriate angle, like they need to be. But this kind of a part on the side of this thing is really going to break up the shape and tie everything together as far as the scale of everything back here, because there's some pretty bold moves going on. And I think once we start seeing all these components, everything's going to fit dialed. Again, all these components, just like the bump stops, exhaust, fuel cells, cross member, all this stuff, this whole build is just leading up to package the stuff properly, where you can really feel the overall design and kind of match even the rough sketches that we've done. Once this stuff is in place, especially like the corners, right? So, you know, your front corners are pretty much done. All of our coolers and all the constraints up there dimensionally are done. Once this portion is where we know it's going to be, we can start exterior design on the body and the panels there, which is another exciting avenue. So I think getting this thing just complete roller is the closest it's been, obviously, but it's not far away, and getting sway bar and bump stop in here and limit strap, and then we're like pretty dialed as far as working functional components on here. While this stuff's being done in the computer, I can just start working around more and more, finalize the trans cooler and the radiator, at least the lower portions of that, and have that thing on a big subsidiary system that comes out as one. So since I was younger, I want to say 15 or so, seeing vehicles like at events such as the Off-Road Expo or similar in raw form had such an impact on me, and it probably had the most impact of any vehicles I ever saw in my life. And I mean it. You know, there was a couple. I remember the certified 7 open truck that had like crazy, it still had a frame, but it had like a crazy mezzanine in the rear. That was one where I'd see it, and it took years to build, but I'd see it at the Off-Road Expo, and I'd look forward to it every year because I'd go over to that booth, and it would just in different various stages each year. And it was so beautiful because you could see exactly how, like, you almost got in tune with the thought process of the builder. Even when I was 15 and just young, dumb, and full of cum, I still could understand like what was going on and the kind of the steps that were there. And I think that there's something to be said when you see things that are raw, and it's not just, there's a lot of angles to it. A lot of it is like, you know, the craft, you can see what's really going on there. You can see the welds, you can see how things were prepped. You can see where blemishes were, where someone had something there and they took it off, or, you know, especially like the sculpted areas on this truck. If this was painted, you wouldn't know if this was just body work. You wouldn't know what kind of finish was under here. And we've made it a thing, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to take it to Montecito Motor Classic and put it on the polo fields with other cars and present it like this. And then this last trip was Fuel Fest, which was at Irwindale Speedway, and that's a national event. It goes around the U.S., does 10 different stops, and you know, we had it in the Terra booth just to present like this. And I don't like see these things anymore in the raw. Like I think maybe RJ's stuff I see and I really appreciate like that, and that might be it. And I just wanted to see with you guys, you know, I'd love to bring this some more places, and I think even for SEMA this year is to get it as far along as we can with components and interior appointments and trim work, and bring it in its raw form again. And I'd love for you guys to kind of have some input of how you'd like to see it, or maybe we put some kind of a special wrap on the exterior that we do have, and then, you know, put everything we can on it and still leave it unpainted, or maybe we do paint it. And just give me some input and leave a comment below. On top of that, like, comment, subscribe. Have a good Monday.